with that, let's kind of transition into, your favorite topic, one that's near and dear to our heart, Nebraska. What went right and what went wrong for Nebraska last year?
Can we start a separate podcast on just what went wrong? Here, I'm going to start this off. What went right? Actually, you know what? I'm going to start with what went wrong. I'm going to go the opposite direction here off the rip. Like, what went wrong? We talked a little bit about it. Coaching. There was a problem before, and I'm speaking specifically to last season, 2022. It was a total disaster. And I found this out. Now, I am from Nebraska. I was recruited by Nebraska in high school. I know a lot of people have come through there and played against guys that played through there. People that were currently on the roster last year, as so do you, Christian. A lot of dysfunction from Scott, the OC, defensive coordinator, and I'm not putting it all on that. Players didn't also perform either. I know a lot of that is coaching, but a lot of issues last year for Nebraska. Coaching changed, week 4? You bring, it was a week 4, week 5. I went to the Oklahoma game when Mickey, I think it was week 4, I think. Was it week 4? 3, maybe. We lost to Northwestern. Georgia, we won a game, and then we played Georgia Southern. It was Oklahoma, right? Is that because I was at the Oklahoma game where Mickey was his first game coming in as an intern.
Yeah.
Interim. I'm a big Mickey Joseph fan as far as coaching goes. I was at that game. That was a crazy, crazy atmosphere, dude. I've been to a lot of Nebraska games. I was there when Tom was there. I've been there since Pelini, all those guys. That was nuts, man. And I thought the team bought in, and we got our asses kicked by Oklahoma. And Oklahoma literally did nothing after they beat us, by the way. But I thought Nebraska improved every week, which is, I think, as any college football fan or anybody that's been around the freaking game, honestly, you want to get better from the start of the year to the end of the year, right? You want to be playing your best football at the end of the year. Nebraska was playing their best football at the end of the year. Wasn't always pretty. It wasn't always great. I'm a Nebraska fan. I hate Iowa. Probably piss some people off in the comments section here, but Nebraska played a great game. They fought hard with what Nebraska had as far as all the up and downs those players had to go through. And it wasn't just last year. It's been turmoil for the last 4. I could speak on that forever, but they did a good job. I was proud of Nebraska when they won that Iowa game. Did we, I didn't act like we won a national title, no, but I was happy for the kids more than anything. Even the fan base needed something. Hey, we won a close game. And I think anybody that's even watching this podcast that even knows anything about Nebraska knows that, holy shit, you guys had that year, last year where you guys are playing against Michigan State, who's rated top 10. Michigan, you guys all play everybody to the end of the wire, and we somehow find a way to shoot ourselves in the foot, right? I mean, it was every game that year. I think we had 3 wins, but we were probably the best 3-win team that ever stepped foot on a football field. So not to deep dive into that crap, but there was a lot of things that went wrong. I thought not all players performed the way they should have. But I also blame most of that on the turmoil and chaos within the Nebraska culture. And I could speak a lot about that and what names and all that if I had to go that deep, but I'm not going to do that here. But it was bad, man. I mean, I think anybody that follows Nebraska knew that last year, holy cow, man, this is a lot worse than some people expected. Even me being very close to the program was wow. Overall though, what went right? Matt Rule comes in, and we spoke on this a little bit, Christian. I am, me personally, and if I'm wrong on this, and I'm starting to, how do I want to word this? Where I've kind of started to lean more towards Matt Rule and feel better about the situation on that hire. And we could probably talk about this for a while about who Nebraska should have hired, but they've hired him. I wasn't the biggest advocate personally, and I'm not a big name in college sports, obviously, but personally, I was like, man, I thought there were a couple other guys out there that I thought maybe deserved a chance. I don't know how those interviews went. Obviously, I'm not in those decisions, but I thought, hey, this guy, though, I will say, has kind of turned my mindset on him is what he's done in recruiting, dude. I think we finished, 24th or 23rd. After losing a ton of, we lost a lot of players when, Scott and Mickey and everybody, the whole ordeal went down at the end of the year. He's done a great job, man. I do like the way he talks. I know he's not from Nebraska. I believe was it Penn State's probably, I think it's actually said his childhood team or whatever, which is fine. I know his history at Baylor. He had, 9-3 or 11-3 season. Yeah, not bad. He was only there for a few years though. I think he was at Temple or whatever, or before that. Watched him coach at Carolina. He's still getting paid by the Panthers. Walked into a tough spot there. If anybody wants to go NFL on me here, but done a good job. So what went right? I think they got a good guy there, man. I think this guy does care. I think he's one of those guys. I will say he means what he says. I don't think he's here to bullshit the Nebraska fan base. I do think he wants to win. What I do love about him, he wants to go back to and you could say this and not mean it, but go back to an old school style of football game, as in run the ball first, versus what we've had in the past. Scott was a very RPO spread style, high paced offensive type of guy. I could get into my whole thoughts on what I think the Big Ten is, but that shit don't work in the Big Ten. Great defenses, smash mouth football, ball control wins in the Big Ten. Let's be honest. This is a different conference than it is the SEC or the ACC or the, God forbid, the Pac-12 and the Big 12, right? There's no defenses in those conferences. So that's where, anyway, so what went right there for Nebraska, end of the year. They do have some players back, by the way. Grant's coming back. What's his name? Casey Thompson at quarterback, I think he's got some, he came from Texas, played a year, last year. And I was very impressed with him at times. There were also times where I thought, God damn, man, like sometimes he looked like he was a rookie out there, but then also I got to look at our offensive line, and I'm a big advocate of offensive defensive line is where you win games. Nebraska's offensive line freaking sucked last year. So I'm not putting all the blame on him, but we do have some pieces back. Matt Rule, if he can improve the offensive line, and especially the defensive line, against the pass rush, and I think we could talk about that later. But Nebraska's, I think, is trending, man. I just thought it was very impressive what they did with Matt Rule, who I'm not the biggest fan of yet, but has turned my head a little bit, like what he's doing as far as recruiting goes. And that's really all we can judge him on and what he says right now. So I obviously we haven't seen Nebraska perform yet, but I do think they're headed in the right direction with that hire. And I will admit that I was wrong, because when I first heard his name, I'm like, no, I don't want that guy. So I will personally stand up and say that, hey, you know what? And you kind of were a guy that brought me to that too. We've talked about this before in the past, but anyway, I'll turn it over to you, not to go off here. So go ahead, Christian.
Preach, I think, what went wrong for him, it started well into the offseason. I kind of alluded to it. I think it was a lot to do with their scheme that they started off running, and just the lack of not really tackling and making that physicality known very early on. That showed, and I think that was ultimately what led to Scott Frost getting fired. I think the signs were there. You could tell, and I think in college football, Chris, you can always tell how good a coach is going to be probably at the end of year 3. You get a guy in year 5 and you're struggling to have winning seasons, you probably need to move on. Let me tell you what this is like. This is like dating that really attractive girl, okay, or really attractive guy, depending, it doesn't really matter. It's like dating that really attractive person that's very, very promiscuous, but you're like, oh, I like that. And then they cheat on you. And then you're like, oh, I don't like that. You know what I mean? And you get your heart broken, right. And then you start to realize, I probably shouldn't do that, right? So then you work on yourself, you get better, you start to say, okay, you know what? Instead of kind of going for that sort of individual, I'm going to look to maybe go with someone that's a little more laid back, a little more modest, and I'm going to really take my time. And I think that's kind of what they did. You look at, Matt Rule, and I'll just kind of get into this, and I'll kind of go back to what I think went right for him. I mean, Matt Rule, I like Matt Rule. I think there's some things that, as a coach, he's 47 and 43, so he's kind of a slightly above 500 as a coach at the college level. Not going to go to the NFL. NFL is a whole different thing, But I think, he's going to have to figure out this league. He's going to have to figure out the team he's got. And speaking of the team that he's got, I think what went right for Nebraska last year was their offense. Their offense made some strides forward, I think. I think that from an offensive standpoint, Casey Thompson showed a lot of flash. So did Anthony Grant.
Trey Palmer,
Trey Palmer. I mean, they're going to have to figure out a way and to replace, that production that Trey Palmer had. They've got some good pieces, and they've got some stuff coming in, as far as, what I think ultimately led to their demise was just, we've talked about this before, and I've kind of got a chance. I covered Nebraska a lot last year. I think what ultimately went wrong for them was it was all, I think Scott Frost, when he was down at UCF, he had to recruit for the schemes that he wanted to run down there. I mean, he couldn't just go and get the best talent he wanted. So he had to go out and get, the best players that fit that scheme. I think when he got to Nebraska, that leash was, was a lot longer. So he could go out and he probably just said, hey, I want to go get the best talent, not necessarily the best talent that fits what I want to do.
Yeah.
So you go out and you get a left tackle that's really good at run blocking, coupled with a right guard that's really good at pass blocking. And so then, you get your blindside tackle get beat on pass protection, you know what I mean? And it just doesn't sync up. I think that, to me, when you look at it, was part of the stuff that kind of happened there. And look, we've talked about it ad nauseum, and I also think that really you don't have to have the best coach out there. I think you just have to have somebody that's a little bit more mature, a little more stable, in the backdrop of things. And I think, you do that and you start to add in the physicality very early on. You get sort of the right scheme to kind of run with the players that you have. And you can use that sort of, that overview of what you're looking at. And I think Nebraska can really do a complete 180 this year.
Right. And not to interject here, but like you kind of touched on it, I didn't bring it up, was I'm a very big advocate in players buying in to their coach. You know what I mean? I don't want to say the word players coach, right, in quotes, but somebody you believe in, you know what I mean? And I thought and I'm not to get into Mickey, but like the players love that guy. Man, I saw personally guys wanting to play for that guy. I did not see that with Scott at the end of his tenure. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's a huge thing. Guys play for Kirby Smart. You know that. They love him, man. He's a dog. No pun intended, in that locker room. You know what I mean? I've seen speeches and I mean, that you need a guy that relates, man. And that's what I hope, Matt, and I think he's probably about that. That makes me happy. That gives me some hope, right? That's all we can wish for as a fan base, right? As Nebraskans, like, shit, man. Hey, we got a chance. And like I said, I think you did a great job of talking about, like, bringing up the fact that, like, the scheme. I think Scott did hire a lot of guys, pick up a lot of dudes that, like, oh, he's a 4-star, right? Well, does he really do what you want him to do in this offense that you run? And it showed a lot. Our offensive line looked like a bunch of, no offense, but skinny, tall guys that could maybe run block, but none of those dudes could pass block. You know what I mean? Like, I'd rather look like a goddamn and run the ball with Anthony Grant. And nobody's going to tell me any different. I think Anthony Grant's still one of the most talented running backs in the country. Run the damn ball, get physical up front, look like some of those Michigan offensive lines they put out, or Wisconsin or Iowa, physical brand of football. You said it. You said the word physical, and that's where I get excited. Like, hey, you know what? Let's. I'm a receiver. Like, Jesus, let's just run the damn football, and get physical and run the ball. Establish some sort of dominance and some sort of freaking identity in this program. That identity, I use that word, hasn't been around for a while now at Nebraska, and it bothers me because that's all I've ever known growing up as a little kid, watching in the early 2000s. We had an identity. You knew when Nebraska stepped on the football field, hey, we're going to fucking establish the run. What are you going to do to stop it? You know what I mean? And that's where I want to get back to. Now, that's easier said than done. Yes, every program wants to do something like that. Get it. But we haven't had one in like 15, 20 years here. You know what I mean? It's every year it's something different. Every coach, it's something different. And we've had enough coaches. That's where I hope Matt Rule steps in and says, you know what, this is what we're going to do. This is the type of football I want to, play. And we recruit those type of guys for that. And yeah, it's going to take time. I don't care. Nobody wins year one unless you're like super crazy lucky. Let's establish some sort of program, recruit the guys. It's going to take a little bit. And everybody doesn't want to hear that word, take time. But it's got to happen, man. Because like you said, step back and just look at it, man. I'm tired of this. Seems like every 4 years, new coach. You know what I mean? And we all buy in. We all want it to happen. Of course we do. Nebraska has probably the best fan base in America. I truly believe that when it comes to college sports, it's time to figure this out, man. I want to see us. I'm 37 years old. I've been a Nebraska fan since a 4, I think. So, like, I don't care if it takes me 5 years. You know what I mean? Like, I want to be able to compete for titles in the Big Ten and be competitive and not, 15, 16 wins in 4 years, dude? Like, we haven't made a bowl game. We had a streak, I think, nation's longest streak of making bowl games. Like, this is getting to a point where it's not to go on another tangent here, but I mean, like, and interject your whole comments on this stuff, Christian, but like, something needs to change, man. It does. You know what I mean? And I think Matt Rule, he has turned my head. I think he does care. And I'd be the first to tell you if I didn't think he did. So go ahead, man. Apologize for the rant there. I just, I get pretty hyped about this Nebraska stuff. So
no, you're good, man. Like I said, I mean, that's your team, like, and I get it. It's frustrating,